Since April Fool's is on Saturday, I decided to do my Loud House vs Casagrandes video today instead of tomorrow, which means the next Loud House vs Casagrandes video will happen next Sunday. So today, it's prank episode versus prank episode. Loud House's April Fool's Rules episode versus the Casagrandes Prankaversary episode. Regards of the two episodes involving pranks, it doesn't change the fact that the two episodes' plots are completely different from each other. Like, I was originally gonna be doing a chronology video involving Luann's April Fool's episodes, but considering it's centered around Luann's character, it's worth saving that for my future Loud House project involving the broken logic of the Loud House or a different title along the way. Now, when it comes to April Fool's Wars, some fans see this as one of the worst episodes of the whole show, mainly the misery that Lincoln goes through. But to be perfectly honest with you, this is nowhere near as a Lincoln torture episode compared to the episodes I tackled in the past, because with this being focusing around Luann and her obsession of April Fools and pranks, it really shows. This is basically the Luann episode of all Luann episodes, and this episode came out in 2016 during the Loud House's first season. And when you take the consideration that Prankiversary came out in 2021, a lot has changed. To the point that when it comes to Lincoln and Ryan's break-in against each other in the Casagrandes episode, I'm not really against the whole pranking against each other between Lincoln and Ryan, because as far as I'm concerned, when people do not see episodes from the Casagrandes, mainly this, they're missing out. This is literally one of the only episodes where I think that Loud House fans should see from the spin-off. In April Fool's Wars, everyone in the Loud House are prepared for Luann's pranking, but at the same time, despite Lincoln trying to have his bedroom all to himself to protect himself from Luann's pranks, it's been revealed that Luann called Ryan to come over. Granted, he didn't know that Luann set him up, but at the same time, he took matters into his own hands by making an alliance with his other sisters to trap Luann throughout the entire day of April Fool's. However, she escaped, all the while setting up all the traps in the house. So Lincoln has to set off all the traps in order to save Ryan from getting pranked. You know, considering that this is the episode where Lincoln gets tortured the most when it comes to physical pain, it's honestly astounding that I don't actually scold Luann, because she's only doing this because she enjoys April Fools and pranking her siblings. Granted, when it comes to the later April Fools episodes, that's a different topic entirely, even if it involves April Fools. The plot of Prankiversary centers around Ryan being prepared for the prank war against Lincoln, and Sid wants to help her out. But once Ryan sets up all the traps, Sid messes them up. In all honesty, the fact that Sergio is doing a scoreboard while also doing negative points towards Ryan and Lincoln, it's honestly difficult on who is somewhat the victor between Lincoln and Ryan. Like, considering of how many negative points that Ryan gained, she ended up in last place regardless. However, when it comes to Sid, since that she's dealing with the same execution that she was in Zoo Emergency, I can't really say that she is mostly the victim, because at the same time, as much as Ryan is trying to be nice to Sid, it didn't change the fact that she just isn't really prank material. In all honesty, with this being the major difference between the two episodes, I've got a feeling that if Sid wasn't part of this episode, then this episode would have been a lot more similar when it comes to how Luann was pranking her siblings. Granted, it will probably be way too similar, but at the same time with this edition, it really feels like that this episode is completely different. Which is really saying something, knowing full well that her character is getting used in an episode like this. Because if we had an episode involving Lincoln versus Ryan, it would have been good, but at the same time, it would have been generic. So in all honesty, with this inclusion, it made me appreciate this episode's efforts. But at the same time, knowing full well that April Fool's Rules is a classic from the Loud House, you can't be able to beat the classics, no matter what. Now, I'm gonna be perfectly honest that once I watched this episode for the first time, it honestly made me convinced that Luann was going to be a lunatic. So desperate to do so many pranks against her siblings without any control. And in all honesty, after thinking about it when people stated that this is one of the worst episodes, I need to point this out, that even if you may have mixed opinions of how these episodes are portrayed, it doesn't change the fact of how this episode's execution just centers around Luann's nature of how she's obsessed with April Fools. And considering that she somewhat was tired in the 4th April Fools episode, it's somewhat made me convinced that she somewhat went through a phase in her lifetime. Like, I would probably not be on board to the fact that her parents would accept this, even when they have 11 siblings, but to be real with you, knowing full well that this is a showcase of Luann's character of how she enjoys April Fools, they really went all out with this episode. With the addition of the other characters have no experiencing in pranking against each other, unlike Luann, it really shows. Because whenever I think about the other characters who are just trying to survive from the pranking, it really feels like they're trying to make the chaos in the Loud House more normalized, knowing full well that inside the Loud House is basically the world of the Loud family. Granted, it may be over-exaggerating, but at the same time, this episode really feels like that the indoor of the house is basically the world of the Loud family, even if it may be a bit too complicated to think about. If there's one thing that April Fool's Rules has given me, is the fact that it actually gave Lincoln some character development, because in Prankiversary, after getting some advice from Luann, he had improved on pranking Ryan, which really shows that the development that he got in Prankiversary is somewhat a continuation after April Fool's Rules, knowing full well that Ryan was also a character in that episode. Let me tell you, if he never had any of that kind of development, he would probably ended up like Sid in this episode, knowing full well of how she lacks of what pranking is and how she needs to set up the pranks correctly and not set them off at the wrong time. I'm just saying, with the amount of times of Luann going extreme with these pranks, I can't deny that if it wasn't for her, Lincoln would probably be in the same position as Sid in Prankiversary. And the way that this episode is executed, with him trying to set off all the pranks in the house, really shows that he actually cares about Ryan, and Ryan did a return in favor in order to get back at Luann after she caught her. Here's the thing, the pranks that Luann set up in this episode, Ryan and Lincoln from Prankiversary can't be able to top them. Granted, there's Sid's prank, but I'm gonna get to that later. My point is that even if these pranks have been way too cruel, the more you think about it, at least Luann improved later on toning down all the pranks. Because let me tell you, if we ever see the day where Luann ever had another April Fool's episode after Silence of the Luanns, I can guarantee you that that's where the show is officially jumping the shark yet again, knowing full well that it's just revolting Luann's personality all over again. Which is why that I think that this episode really feels like that this is basically a phase that Luann had to deal with. In all honesty, I wouldn't even like Luann as a character, even with her positives, with her relationship of her boyfriend, among other things. Because for me personally, when she's done with the state of pranking on her family and doing April Fool's shenanigans, then I'm going to be fully acceptable on how she's developed as a character. Granted, it doesn't change the fact that some of the bad episodes features her worst moments, but less said about that, the better. Okay, so let's get into Sid's prank against Sid and Lincoln. After having a discussion of how prank takes time, Sid took Lincoln and Ryan's words into consideration as she leaves them alone to do their own prank war. At the park, after accidentally pranking Sid's younger sister Adelaide, Adelaide told them that Sid is in trouble because she's being attacked by the monkeys at the zoo. Upon entering the reptile cage, they witness a huge snake that gobbled up Sid. But at the same time, it's not really Sid inside of that snake. Apparently, it was all part of a plan in order to traumatize Lincoln, Ryan, including her sister, but not really. You know, when people discussed Luann's prank and Fool Me Twice being way too cruel, let's not forget that it wasn't traumatizing. This is traumatizing to think that Sid fooled Lincoln and Ryan that she got eaten by a snake, all the while that she is suffocating. If anything, it really shows that Sid come up with a solution thanks to the animals. To be real with you, the invincibility that Lincoln had in April Fool's Wars just goes to show that nobody dies whatsoever. And to think that Sid was faking on getting eaten just goes to show that there was a lot more what the characters can do that aren't Lincoln and Ryan, or even Yuan. Here's the thing, the ending of April Fool's Wars is somewhat good when it comes to shippers of Lincoln and Ryan, but if you ask me, compared to Prankiversary, it really feels like they want to do something interesting, knowing forward that they're focusing on the characters of the spin-off and not from the main franchise. Since that Lincoln and Ryan came from the main show, all the while that Ryan gets a show of her own in 2019, it really feels like that if these characters ended up getting the last laugh at the end, it would have been too predictable. Whenever I watch this episode, it really feels like that the development of characters is there, but it's being overshadowed by the negativity. Not that I blamed the negativity, it just really feels like that it's really amazing to think that a spin-off character can do something that overweighs the odds against the other characters, mainly of how that character doesn't know much about pranking and she manages to win against true pro prankers. Even if you may understand that this show can't be difficult to get into, you need to understand that it's trying to make characters like Sid to be likable. Granted, it's a shame we're never going to see her when it comes to minor appearances, but at the same time, rewatching these episodes just goes to show that there's a lot more once you look into the plot and characters. But no matter what, April Fool's Wars is the superior episode. Not because of the torturous pranks, it's mainly the fact of how it introduces Luann's obsession of April Fools and pranking her family. If you ask me, the hate of this episode, while understandable, is overrated. I'm just gonna be honest that the pranks that we see in the highlight reel, aside from Luann shaving the animals, which is actually crossing the line, the West is just harmless, and it's honestly supposed to be humorous, and it didn't really harm the characters in any other way. Whenever I could really look at the character's face and feel in this highlight reel, it somewhat makes sense, but at the same time, it really feels like that they just couldn't get into Luann's nature of pranking, knowing full well that her puns is the least of what they're aware of. But as usual, there is effort in the Casagrandes episodes, but it doesn't change the fact that the Loud House is getting more points than before. But let me tell you, the next Loud House vs. Casagrandes video that I'm going to be uploading next Sunday, the Casagrandes will probably get another point, because let me tell you, if you really think that the Casagrandes is taking episode ideals from the Loud House, think about it the other way around. Yes, it may be confusing at first, but still, I choose wisely when it comes to the episodes of both shows whenever I make these videos. I'm giving April Fool's Rules an 8.75 out of 10, while Prankiversary gets an 8.25 out of 10.